Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to council meeting of November 7th. And we have guests in the chamber, so it's wonderful. We don't often get them, so thank you. So I would like to just start with some opening remarks. And because we have so many, I have asked council to help me. So Tom, do you want to start with yours?
Remembrance Day, 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month. We pause in collective remembrance of the soldiers who have served, those who continue to serve, and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. Flags at town facilities will be lowered to half-mast on Friday, November 11th to recognize Remembrance Day. Royal Canadian Legion, of course, organizes and hosts the Remembrance Day service. This year will be on November 11th, of course, BCF, starting at about 10:30. Lots of the other places in town have Remembrance Day ceremonies. I know schools on November 10th, Sunshine Lodge on November 10th as well. So take the opportunity to remember.
And you have something else on Light Fest.
And on a little bit friendlier note, the Badlands AMP is hosting Light Fest. All through the month of November, actually, on the weekends, November 12th and 13th this weekend, they have what is called Memories of Light. So they have a trail of lights, they have live music, they have lantern making. Entry begins at 6 p.m. and admission is free, but you do need tickets. So go on the Badlands AMP website and get your free tickets. And then November 18th, 19th, they have what's called the Night Sky, Global Fest fireworks, live music, costumes. And then November 25th, 27th, Story of the Land, Trail of Lights, lit up teepees, hoop dance performances. And again, all of these things are free, but you do have to have a ticket.
Thanks, Tom. Crystal, you've got announcement for flood open house.
Yeah, the flood open house is happening on November 17th. The Drumheller Resiliency Flood Mitigation Office will be hosting an in-person community engagement session at the Badlands Community Facility from 6 until 8 p.m. This session will focus on the East Cooley Hospital, Machichi Creek, and downtown Burns. Representatives from the Town of Drumheller's Development Authority will also have a booth and will be available to answer any questions about the upcoming land use bylaw and municipal development plan amendments. You're able to drop in and visit each table to learn about the projects, provide input, and have any questions answered.
Thanks, Crystal. Stephanie?
Coffee with Council will be taking place from 10:30 a.m. until 12 p.m. on Monday, November 14th at McDonald's. The address there is 680 2nd Street Southeast. Coffee with Council gives residents the chance to come out and meet with your elected officials to ask questions, provide feedback, and chat about all things Drumheller. We look forward to seeing you there. Registration is not required.
Tony?
Yeah, just a reminder that it's snow season. To keep our residents safe, please keep your sidewalks clear of snow and ice. If it's not completed, it can be done by the town at the residents' expense. Just a reminder that it should not be shoveled out onto the roadway and should be piled onto your own property. Shoveling can be difficult for many citizens, and we encourage neighbors to consider being a snow angel. Snow angels are individuals who voluntarily shovel snow for residents needing snow removal assistance. For more information about home help and outdoor services program, you can visit the drumheller.ca site.
Thanks, Tony. Patrick?
Thank you, Your Worship. The town of Drumheller has several projects underway, and we're looking for feedback from residents. So on November 22nd, we're going to have 2 drop-in open house sessions at the BCF. These sessions will showcase the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the Drumheller Housing Strategy, and the Community Social Needs Assessment. These are in-person sessions from noon till 2 p.m. and again at 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. again on November 22nd.
And finally, I would just like to announce that Kelly and I have become grandparents to a little baby boy named Owen John. So I'm pretty excited. So, yes. All right, so is there any additions to the agenda? Nope, so can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Tony,
I move that council adopt the agenda for the November 7th, 2022 regular council meeting as presented.
seconder, please. Stephanie, comments? All in favor? Carrie, can I get a motion to adopt the minutes of the October 24th organizational and regular council minute, please? Patrick?
I move the council adopt the minutes from the October 24th, 2022 organizational and regular council meeting as presented.
Seconder, Tom, comments? All in favor? Carried. All right, we'll move on to 6.1, please, Mauricio, and I will get you to introduce the people from CIBC Wood Gundy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight we have a couple of guests, James Hobson and Charles Chahal. They are from CIBC Wood Gundy. They are our investment advisors. And tonight they will be providing an economic update to council. They do a lot of these presentations to their clients. And they will be basically able to answer any questions regarding the presentation at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, James and Chad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mauricio, for the introduction, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having us here today. We apologize for not being there in person, but just due to the crazy road conditions out there, it just wasn't possible. But for the next one, we certainly will be. So just by way of introduction, my name is James Hobson. We've got Charcha Hall. As Mauricio mentioned, we manage the long-term investment portfolio for the town and have been doing so since 1996. So I've been personally kind of working with the town since 2010, and it's certainly been a pleasure working with administration. So we're here today to give you an economic update. We've tried to condense it so we have some time for questions for everybody. But essentially, we've never had so much demand for these presentations lately. We work with 65 municipalities, mostly in Alberta, and there's a lot of questions on council's mind right now. It's starting to impact our budgets, and I want to walk through kind of just sort of like a lay of the land to give you just some insights on what's happening in Alberta and across the country. So we're going to chat about central bankers. These are the actors that are really making moves these days. And the reason for that would be obviously, unless you're living under a rock, inflation has become a major concern. So we'll chat about that. We'll give you our interest rate forecast and then our kind of thoughts on, are we headed for a recession? What are the risks there? And then we'll end up with commodities and we'll answer some questions. So first and foremost, probably not to anyone's surprise, these show you the growth forecast, so the GDP growth forecast for the largest economic regions in the world, the US, the Euro area, and the UK. And as you can see, since even just the start of this year, the forecast for growth next year have slid materially. So the US has gone from 2.5% forecast growth next year. If we updated this till today, it would actually dip either flat or slightly into the negatives. Same trend in the Euro area, and the UK certainly is not looking as good as well. So the reason for this is basically due to inflation and central bankers raising interest rates. So central bankers, I'm sure everyone's aware, the Bank of Canada has been hiking interest rates very aggressively, alongside the US, who's also hiking interest rates very aggressively. So this shows you the current overnight rate, and then what we expect in sort of the middle of next year. So central bankers, especially in the US, are hiking rates at a rapid rate. Notably, the blue line there in the European Central Bank has finally taken rates out of the negative territory, which they've been in for absolutely years and years. And so it's starting to have a pretty dramatic shock to slow down our economies. We've been running too hot, which has caused this inflation issue, which is why we're raising rates so quickly. So inflation is kind of the elephant in the room here. We are at a 40-year high for inflation data coming out of both the US and Canada. We can see here the inflation rates. CPI data in the US is a bit more up to date, but certainly over 8% year over year. And that is the reason why the central banks are trying to do everything they can to try and bring this inflation back down to earth. Now you can see there the dotted line, that's our forecast. We do see inflation coming back down towards that 2% target, but it's going to take some time. We're going to be in this elevated inflationary environment for at least the next 6 months to a year. And it remains to be seen how effective these interest rate hikes are going to be in actually bringing down that inflation number. Now, the main question we get from councils across the province is, okay, well, inflation is high now, but it's going to fall in the future. Well, the problem with that is the bill's already been incurred, right? So we've already seen prices go up by 6, 7, 8%, in some areas even more. And just because the rate of change comes down, it doesn't mean prices will stop moving higher. So this has become a really big focal point around budget time for councils. And just to kind of graphically illustrate, this is not just a Canada issue or a US issue. This is across the globe. This shows you that more than 40 central banks have increased interest rates by at least 0.75%, at least once since the start of the year. So just to put it in context, a normal rate hike in Canada would be 0.25%. The reason they do it slowly is what chart will walk you through is we're quite sensitive to higher interest rates. So when you start hiking by 75 basis points multiple times, you're going to have a dramatic impact on consumer spending, and you're really going to start to slow things down, which we'll walk you through in a minute here. So what has this done to the bond market? Well, yields have jumped the fastest in this year since any year dating back to data starting in 1962. This just shows you the yield on 10-year US government bonds, and you can see they're up significantly. To put it in context, last year, a 2-year government bond yielded 0.25%. Now we're at 4%. So that's a 375 basis point move in less than a year. So it has pretty material impact when you're looking at how to invest the town's funds, but also where the borrowing rates are as well, right? It's going to push up the cost of our borrowing, which I'll get into in a minute here. And then just to kind of lastly touch on inflation, this just breaks it down by component pieces. And the main thing just to note here is the red and green bars at the bottom. So in the forecast, we don't see that home prices or shelter prices have actually peaked. That's going to take some time for those higher mortgage rates to work its way through the housing market to really start to bring down those rents, bring down those property prices. So because that's the biggest component in CPI inflation is housing. So, but we can also see that core goods and other services, we should have seen kind of the spike, like the very peak in terms of the pace of of price increases for the rest of that inflation basket. We actually see a slight deflation in actual goods coming into the latter part of 2023. So why is inflation such an issue, and why are the central banks raising rates so fast? Well, the problem is the supply side of the equation has been stubborn, absolutely stubbornly persistent. So if you've tried to order anything lately, a couch or a dishwasher, it can take months and months and months. And these are kind of the reasons why. So these supply chain issues, which is sort of the part of the equation that nobody can change, was created due to COVID, right? So just-in-time inventory, businesses weren't holding enough inventory to meet these dramatic surge in spending that's come out of this pandemic. We had the toilet paper problem, so citizens hoarding certain goods and buying things in advance. Manufacturing capacity is very tight, so they have a hard time catching up. We've entered what we would believe to be a wage price spiral, where I talked about regular inflation, but wage inflation is also running quite hot, more than 5% across the major sort of metropolitan areas. So what we're seeing is employers starting to be forced to hike wages in response to employee demands that, inflation is so high and I need to make ends meet. So it's going to be a bit more challenging to compete with the private sector to attract and retain top talent. And they're going to be expecting higher wages over the next couple of years. Obviously, the war in Ukraine has had some issues, especially with food, grain, things like that. And then obviously COVID-19, the lockdowns, especially in China, which I'll get down to in a minute. But essentially, all this is painting a picture of if we can't impact the supply side, we have to impact the demand side, which is why they're raising rates to bring down that consumer spending. And I mentioned sort of China lockdowns, just to put it in perspective, how dramatic this year has been. During the peak of the pandemic in early 2020, China's export volumes fell by about 7%. That's a massive hit to exports globally because they export so many things that we all use every day. This year, China export volumes were actually down 12%. So even more severe than in the depths of the starts of the pandemic. So again, this is just exacerbating those supply chain issues, which again is why the only way to bring things back to normal would be to keep raising interest rates. And just to kind of put it in context, this is a lot of data, but the key lines here would be the top line. That's the overnight rate that the Bank of Canada sets. We see them hiking up to about 4.25%, and then leveling off there. So the good news is for those of us with debt is they should be basically at the peak of where they're going to hike. That should be enough to slow the economy down and bring inflation back down with it. So we see them actually, the market has started actually price in rate cuts as soon as about a year from now. So that's the bond market saying, okay, you're raising rates too aggressively. You're going to push us towards the knife edge of recession. So we think you're going to have to cut at some point. Then the last thing I'll note on this slide is the 10-year government bond. This is what sets your borrowing rates and the investment returns that the town would see on the portfolio. Again, similar story here. We believe that those yields have peaked and that we're going to see them actually fall by as much as a full percentage point over the coming year. So what this means is our borrowing costs have gone up materially, but we don't think they're going to go up too much more from here. And actually, we think those rates should actually start to come down over the next year and a half. So, and on the same token, it creates some opportunities in the investment world, which is probably outside the context of this conversation. But as yields come down, we can crystallize excess capital gains and really boost the town's investment revenue.
Awesome, thanks, James. So, what James is kind of the picture he's kind of painting, although yes, we're in a rising interest rate environment. If I were to go back to that world chart that he had showed, obviously, as you kind of pointed out, it's not a domestic problem. It's not just strictly tied to North America. There are some differences, though, when we start to look across the globe. What the primary difference between us and our counterparts across the pond there in UK and Europe is our central bankers are, I'm going to say the word trying because it depends on what optimistic or not so much optimistic view you want to take these days. Our central bankers are trying to raise interest rates without raising them too fast to create what's called a soft landing, essentially raising them so much that they can slow the economy down, slow inflation down, and not push us into a recession. Now, I will get into why that's kind of a hard probability to predict into the next slide there, but our European counterparts right now are on the opposite side of the coin. They're actually more inclined to actually push their economies directly into a recession. And the primary difference being the war in Ukraine being a larger factor and a larger catalyst for them over there. To get that under control, they actually need, there's actually pressure to actually push it into a recession. So that's the main drivers. Across the globe, you're getting rising interest rates, but the difference between North America and the US is we're a little bit hesitant to rise too quickly compared to what they're doing on that side of the border. Now, how we stack up here from our province perspective within Canada. So overall, Canada is going to do okay next to all of our peers in the G7. However, in Canada, it's a little bit, if we look a little bit of a microscopic view here, the two key pieces to look at on this slide are obviously, yes, I'm an eternal optimist and I always find something positive to give you, no matter how crazy the world looks out there. So I'll start by saying the prairies are going to lead growth because we've had quite a few number of years of 2021, 2022, and now going into 2023 and even 2024 of leading growth, obviously commodity driven. Now that's going to persist for the next couple of years. The key number to keep in mind here is we're coming off the back of a massive nominal GDP growth here in Alberta and Saskatchewan, 23 and 22%. Obviously, that's commodity driven. And obviously, that's driving the price of inflation, as James kind of touched on as well. So overall, our provinces are going to fare a little bit better than all of our other counterparts, which makes sense because, as we all know here, in Alberta, it's kind of a micro economy within the overall perspective of Canada. We've lived through how many mini recessions versus Canada has not. So obviously, as inflation goes high because of commodities, we should fare better than a lot of our counterparts as well. Now, I go back to that comment about, are we going to be in a recession? Me and James get this question a lot. Is the US going to get pushed into a recession? Me and James debate this all the time. The economists' probabilities, I'm not even making this up, are currently at 50%. Anytime you hear economists telling you that there's a 50% probability of a recession, that's telling you they don't know. And it's literally a coin toss at this point. The reason that they're not technically calling for a recession is because, by definition, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative period growth. Now, if you look at the middle of the third column in there, in Q4 of this year, 0%. Q1 of next year, minus 2%. So as close to not being able to call a recession without being a recession as you could possibly get. But the effects of recession are already there. The unfortunate part of a recession too is, by the time everybody's thinking about it or talking about it, most likely it's already, the ball's already been pushed over the hill and it's already going to come to triggered. So from a growth perspective, it makes sense that, as James is just saying, we're raising rates, right? So GDP is expected to come down. Domestic demand is what they're having to try and tackle because they can't wait for supply, is going to come down. Consumption will be coming down. So all the data is lining up with what the forecasts are. And then inflation, as James kind of touched on, it's going to take until mid next year is what the forecast for it to come materially back down. So Q2 of next year is what we're thinking, back in line with the Bank of Canada's target of 2%. And then the unemployment rate, a little bit, it's going to take slightly higher, not too much materially to cross over to bring larger concerns of where we are at right from now. But basically, the microeconomic data is lining up with what the inflation forecast is showing from a rising rate environment, which, to nobody's surprise, makes a lot of sense. The one thing that we are tracking very closely from our in-house economics team is housing data and lending. Both of those data are lagging indicators, and the problem with lagging indicators, by the time they flash any sign, it's already too late and the pain's already been pushed in. The chart you're looking at right now is the US side of the border. Housing affordability now at its worst level since 1985. The data that you're looking at right now is basically the average income needed to cover the average price of a mortgage in the States. The US is a little bit different because they can lock themselves into these longer term 30-year fixed rate mortgages. In Canada, as James kind of mentioned, why the Bank of Canada is a little bit more cautious to raising rates as aggressively as everybody else is, we are a lot more sensitive to rate hikes than we are to our counterparts on the south side of the border there. The reason being is our mortgage rules and how sensitive we are to the debt levels. So what you're looking at here is, on the left side, only about a quarter of our debt has been hit and impacted by the current rising rate environment. And obviously that's going to grow over time as these mortgage renewals come up and people start to reset into these new mortgages. And to give you guys context on the level of difference they're going to be resetting into, if we look 5 years back at where people had their 5-year fixed mortgages and where they'll be resetting into right now, the difference between what a 5-year fixed is from then to what now, 1.8%. From a 5-year fixed to the 5-year to the variable, 0.8%. So we material shift higher in everybody's rates that's going to be coming due. That doesn't mean that 75% of the households are going to take that this year. It just means over time, people are going to start to see these impacts of these rising rates. As the call is not for an interest rate cut in the next quarter or even the next 6 months, it's going to take time. So for the next year, even to 18 months, as we are in this kind of higher rate environment, people are going to start to massively feel the impact of this. The Bank of Canada is smart. They see this data. That's why they're a little bit more hesitant than everybody else up in the US and Europe to raise rates too aggressively, which is why on their last one, they only did a 50-point hike versus the call for 70 points, or for 75 points. So that would be why we're sitting at about 375 right now. On the commodities perspective, obviously it kind of lines up with the data as well. When you're increasing interest rates, the growth forecasts are going to come down. Growth forecasts come down. The price of all commodities, which are inputs into economies, are going to come down along with them. However, with the price of oil and the price of natural gas, oil sitting at $92, natural gas sitting about just over $6.70 right now. Those are two very fundamentally well-supported prices. So yes, demand and forecasted growth is coming down. We are coming down from a price of $120 to $90. If I flash back 2 years ago and did an economic update saying our price of oil was going to be $90, that's a very bullish sentiment. That's a very good, strong, sustainable, that's the key word here, sustainable price in the price of commodities, and natural gas obviously rallying from the seasonality that we're going under the effects and going into winter here. And you're going to see kind of a floor on commodity prices driven by two things: the war between Russia and Ukraine obviously being a big factor, and the OPEC doing the cuts from their production standpoint. So that essentially sets a floor on the price. What floor is yet to be seen. I personally think it's around $80 to $85. Still very well fundamentally supported, but not a lot of growth concerns. But from a downside perspective, we got a good floor going on. The other element that we've seen as well, obviously the human capital element of the war is a terrible effect. However, when you sanction Russia and all the global countries out there start sanctioning Russia in terms of what it's allowed to export, when you're exporting a physical commodity in a physical sector, there's only so many other regional areas you can get it from. If you overlay a map of Canada and Russia, it's almost like a mirror image of what our exports are versus what their exports are. So obviously Canada is going to compete for market share with Russia, and it's not a hard competition when there's sanctions on there. So we should get support in terms of our economic, I don't want to say growth, but a limiter to our downside essentially is what we're going to see based on the current forecast from a commodities perspective. Now, just kind of summing up what we kind of see here, we call this where the recession monster lurks. This is basically where the excessive risks to the economies lurk going forward. Excessive rate hikes by central bankers. From here, we're kind of already felt the full amount of pain here. So have they already raised rates too high? That's yet to be seen in the data. A spike in the oil price to $150, depending on what the war in Russia happens, and if that continues to persist and it continues to shock supply, a excess spike in oil leading to excess spike in inflation. The financial markets and wealth effect, essentially, the markets continue to go down, people feel less wealthy and then spend less in the economy, which is driving growth slower than everybody anticipated in the first place. Inflation expectations build or supply chains issues deepen. Inflation expectations, we don't think that's a large concern when you have interest rates as high as they are. Supply chain issues, it's actually to the other side right now where everybody's kind of watching China's zero COVID policy to see if they can ease up on that at all. They did just come out and say they're holding firm with it, but who knows what the future holds. I'm long done trying to forecast what COVID regulations and restrictions are going to do within the next short-term period. So we'll see what they do on that one, but right now they're holding firm. Next one, geopolitical risk. Does it spread? Chinese and Taiwan, we've seen the sentiment and the rhetoric start to escalate there. These are things that some people are starting to be concerned with. And the last time we get hit with a pie in the face, that spelling is there for a reason. We don't know what we went through: Delta, Omicron, and maybe the next one is pi, whatever it may be. We don't know what sanctions those hold, but if it is higher, essentially higher fatality or mortality rates, things like that, and a higher transmissible rate, these are things to be watching. We don't think those are concerns. We think that a lot of these are just outliers, but they are things to be watching as we kind of go into the economic update kind of going forward. So slow growth kind of going forward. We're not calling for a straight day stagflation at this point, but the rising rate environment, we think we have kind of essentially peaked near the top with 4.25. 4.25, 4.50, the rate, that rate is less important as what the 10-year is doing, which is what James touched on, which is what we see having peaked. Now with that, which is a significant amount of economic data in a very short amount of time, we want to give you guys time for questions as well.
Well, thank you so much. You guys are just a real happy group joining us today. All right, council comments. Go ahead, Crystal.
Thanks for the presentation, as always. I just want to verify the package that is published. There was a few slides missing, and actually slide number on page 12, it had different rates on it. So I'm not sure if we can update that for the public so that they can actually see what we saw today, because it is different. That's the short rates on page 12. So
I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, we should clarify for council. We had a longer update that would have put us a little bit over time. So we did a condensed version that we updated and then updated the rates as well. So I'll
Okay.
make sure you guys get the correct copy.
Great, thank you.
Tom?
Thank you for the presentation. Nice and gloomy. So I'm curious, logistical. So it seems like you talked about getting everything from manufacturers to the public is a big problem. And it seems to me that underlying a lot of these problems is a lack of manpower. That it seems like every transportation company is looking for employees. Half of the businesses in Drumheller are looking for workers. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that. Is that kind of a, I don't know, a North America problem that there don't seem to be as many people to work as there were? And if so, where did these people go?
It's a great comment there, and you're bang on. So there's a couple of issues affecting logistics when it comes to supply chain. The biggest one that we saw was at the ports. So the ports got overwhelmed. If you took some pictures of Long Beach, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of ships just parked in the port, waiting to offload their goods. So that's one side of it that's caused some supply chain issues. But I think what you're really hitting the nail on the head there is the shortage in labor to actually move goods around. It's well documented right now. There's a big shortage in truckers and people that are willing to actually, drive goods across the country. Part of that is because, they got pretty burned during COVID. And so it's harder to attract people to go back to those professions. And the other part of it is just simply what we talked about, wage inflation. People are demanding higher wages these days to try and support their families, and so they're looking at other industry sectors to seek employment. But yeah, you bang on. Sort of the logistical issues are severely impacting the supply chain of the equation.
And just to add to what James is saying as well, we were reading this article this morning specifically on that topic there. What we've also seen in conjunction with with the labor market demanding higher wages, specifically for the sectors that were affected by COVID, like the service sector and transportation, things like that, there's still somewhat of a hesitancy for businesses to kind of match that wage inflation expectation from the transportation service sector model. Is one party right versus the other party? Not too sure. It's just there seems to be a disconnect on both of those, and right now they're not meeting the expectations. So the demand is there. People are hiring. It's just I don't think they want to hire for the right rate is what people think they're being marketed at. So the market will find equilibrium. It's just going to take some time.
And then just the last comment I think you made as well, the participation rate has come down after COVID. A lot of people resigned and just sort of thought, okay, life's too short. I'm going to just retire now and go and do other things, spend time with my family, travel, things like that. So we did see a drop in the actual participation rate in the labor force as well.
Tony?
Yeah, great presentation, guys. I'm in the same camp as you. I think we're there, maybe another quarter half yet, but there's a year of pain ahead of us. Just a quick question with regards to the Canadian dollar, which has impact on inflation as well. We used to follow the dollar used to follow the price of oil there. It's since decoupled from that, and I guess with our imports, just costs us more for the imports, which feeds into the food inflation. Do you see that coming back, that relationship back to crude oil and our dollar?
So I'll take that one, Chart, then you can add to it. So great comment. We do get that quite a bit. So there's a few factors that impact currencies. What the finance theory will tell you about forecasting currencies is that it's not actually possible to do it accurately 100% of the time. But there are some factors, like you pointed out, commodities in Canada are tied to the strength of the Canadian dollar. What's really caused that decoupling over the past 6 months is just simply the rate of rate hikes. Sort of the speed that the central banks are raising interest rates in the US versus Canada. So Jerome Powell is raising rates faster than us. So I get paid more to hold a US dollar investment than I do to hold a Canadian dollar investment. So that simply shifts money out of Canada and into the US. Money goes where it gets paid the most, right? So, that's been the major fundamental factor that's caused that massive spike in the US dollar. But it's true not just in against the Canadian dollar. If we graphed the euro, the pound, the yen, all the major currencies against the US dollar, they've all dropped off a cliff. So they've kind of starting to call it king dollar. The last factor chart, you can talk about commodities, but we've seen obviously a lot of volatility in the stock market and the bond market. So we're seeing money start to move into cash. So it just simply creates demand for actual cash.
And then just touch on the commodities as well. You're absolutely right, where there is that correlation between the US dollar and the price of oil. Having been in that world for quite a long time, I will say that we actually quite a bit joked about that. It depends on the view that you're taking and how the time frame you're essentially taking. If you were to extrapolate and go back 20 years and take it a long-term chart, that correlation is there. On the shorter term cycles, it's always going to be pushed around by exactly what James just said, by demand for the on the rate cycle side. So I do think there's going to be a normalization. But the reality is the correlation between USD and the price of oil is a longer term cycle that takes quite a bit of time to kind of snap back within. So I'm talking like 5 to 10 year cycles versus the 6 month to 1 year windows.
But I guess as in terms of a forecast, I think we've seen the worst pain. There's only so far the dollar can go before the Bank of Canada starts to get pretty nervous. As you mentioned, the price of all of our imports from the States starts to go up, which creates, adds to that inflation fire. So, that we may see them pick up the rate of hikes if that is the case. If the US just keeps chugging along, raising rates aggressively, we can't see our dollar fall to 60 cents on the dollar. It's just they're not comfortable with that level.
Anybody else? Yeah, this is kind of a tough thing, especially with your first article there, the Wall Street Journal, and they say Q1 21 won't cause inflation, and then at the end of it they're giving a whole different statement. So a lot of this seems to be everybody's holding on, trying to figure it out, but in many ways it's a guessing game. So I guess for the best guessing game, thank you for the presentation that you gave, and we appreciate you looking after the funds, and at the end of the day we just want to make sure we can do the best we can with the funding we have. So thank you for that. Mauricio, do you have anything to add? All right, thank you gentlemen for your time. Have a great day and stay warm.
Thank you.
Thank you. You as well.
Okay, let's move on to 6.2, please. Drumheller Housing Administration. Bob and Cassandra are going to do the presentation here. Thank you.
Perfect. Do I flip it? I'll just do it. Okay. Thank you for having us. So we'll just go through a quick presentation on what Drumheller Housing is, and then certainly take questions in the middle or at the end. So Drumheller Housing is, this computer's starting up, so I'm not sure how long it's going to take. Okay. But anyway, so Drumheller Housing was created by ministerial order, so it's like a corporation with the Alberta government, but it was created in 1995 by the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and Ray Page started managing in, so this will go on the screen for people at home. Okay. Ray Page started managing the properties in 1971, and continued through to when Drumheller Housing was first incorporated, and continued managing until about 2005. Then the current management body that Cass and I belong to took over in 2009, and we've managed it ever since. And so just a little bit about the properties. So obviously Green Tree is on 1.3 acres, 26 units, and it was built in 1967. Hunt's just over half an acre with 24 units, 1971. And Sandstone is the newest property in 2009 with 20 units. And
That's okay. And then, so the one of the interesting things about property in Drumheller is that most of the rental property units in all of Drumheller, public and private, were built before 1983. So Sandstone is one of the newest buildings in town, and so thus makes it a desirable property. There's a differentiation between subsidized properties and affordable properties. And so the subsidized properties are subsidized based on a person's circumstances. So we have a formula that we follow. It's not our formula, it's a government formula. And essentially, people can pay for a full house as low as $120 a month. And that would be in the market at well over $1,000, but it's based on their circumstances. And the affordable housing is just based on 10% below market rates. So as market rates go up and down, we often have a discussion with the board, inform them what the rents are, and then they will adjust one way or another. So,
Just a sec, Bob, they're just having a bit of trouble with the
yeah, no problem.
presentation here, so for the
Do you want me to keep
people.
going? Okay. So how we run the maintenance program is with 6 part-time contractors. Now I think most of them work full-time for us, but they're dispatched piecemeal work as things need to be done. So they would only work part-time on Drumheller Housing and they'd work part-time on other properties. So this means that Drumheller Housing doesn't have staff sitting around doing nothing if there's nothing going on. Yeah, we have durable flooring. We use one color of paint in all the units. So if just a wall needs to be touched up, we don't have to paint the whole unit, and just really try to make it affordable. I'd say the biggest struggle we have is when a unit gets looking pretty old after 10 years of somebody living in the property, that we're begging them to move out from like a lived-in unit to a brand new unit so that we can renovate that unit and keep it up. So in our opinion, the properties are really well cared for, much more than in regular market rentals, to be honest. So the next few slides are just some of the upgrades we're working on in 2022. So one of the issues we took over when we started managing the properties was water drainage issues. We have that in a lot of places in Drumheller. So the sidewalks would slope towards the buildings. We've either torn those sidewalks out or replaced them with paving or concrete. And so if you drive by the neighborhood, you'll see that work. But the actual purpose of that work is to keep the rainwater and groundwater away from the foundations of those properties. And then in the Sandstone building, one of the struggles with apartment buildings today is people want their Amazon packages delivered and they're unsecure at the front of the building or sometimes left in the snow. So Canada Post put in one of these boxes for us. And also when the building was built, we're not sure why, but the mailboxes were built on the outside of the building, which, as you can imagine, weather like this would be it'd be pretty cold to open that box. The basements of the units, we paint the entire basement of the unit. Two purposes: it's clean and nice, but we also want to know if there is water coming in. So the only way to know is to when we paint the unit, we can see if there's any effervescence in the units. So we think we have so far with sump pumps and then the exterior grading work we've done. We think we have pretty much all of the units taken care of without any ongoing basement issues. Just every once in a while, there's a crazy rain that will cause that problem. It happens in the same issue happens in just regular single family houses as well, but we think we've got that fixed. Also coordination. We understand that in a lot of these neighborhoods, people may not have a pickup truck to get rid of their stuff. So we coordinate and help them with move outs of, getting rid of a bed or a couch, which is something you wouldn't normally do in a normal rental, but just making the situation fit our tenant profile. And then sidewalks. So this is separate from the drainage issue, but we also got a grant this year to replace 5 sidewalks for 5 different units. The grant came in 2021, but the work was completed in 2022. We've switched out all of our furnaces to high efficiency furnaces, and the last 2 were done this last year. And then because of the supply chain, we now have an inventory of fridges and stoves, so we're not waiting 3-4 weeks for them to come in. Just a sign of the times. We have a project in Hunts. We're half done, and we're going to have to continue on this next year to do both the sidewalks and the patios in Hunts. And then one of the things that was asked was to provide what we have for vacancy, and this one we should probably try to go full screen. David, can you do full screen on this one, or we'll go to? Anyway, so we have very little vacancy, as I'm sure many people in the community would know. A lot of our vacancy is just based on properties being renovated. So in Green Tree, we have 1 4-bedroom, we have 1 3-bedroom, and then no 1-bedrooms available. We have both those units are being renovated right now. We will have 2 more at the end of the month here that are coming up, and then with Sandstone, so we have no vacancy available. Sandstone's completely full, and then our waiting list is at the bottom there. So 4 1-bedrooms, 3 2-bedrooms, 1 3-bedroom. The one thing about the waiting list is that it's different to have a waiting list for Sandstone than it would be to have a waiting list for subsidized housing, because subsidized housing you have to qualify for. And so there will people come into the office, and Cass can sort of explain this a little better, but people come into the office and they'll apply looking for subsidized housing. And then by the time we call them back, they've already found alternate housing, or they're on the rental assistance benefit. When it comes to what's needed in the community, there actually should be, 3 or 4 properties that are vacant available for someone in need whenever they need them. If we have no vacancy, people have to live somewhere, so they move out of the community, or so this would be different than a normal apartment. A normal apartment, you're happy when it's full, but the way we manage this, we actually want some vacancy, so there's availability for people. And then we included at the bottom of the slide just what we believe the market rent is. And what I would say is just believe that we think that these rates are still increasing from where they are now. This is what we see people are renting for, but because the vacancy in the entire market is so low, that we see these rates slowly creeping up, continuing from where they are here. And these are up probably 15% from a year and a half ago.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. Questions, council? Go ahead, Stephanie.
I guess just more of comments. It looks like you're doing a really good job of maintaining and upkeeping the properties. And it's really smart to be stockpiling on the fridges and ovens and stuff. I thought that was a great idea. So thank you guys.
Yeah, no problem. Especially with the fridges, because when a fridge goes out, you only have a certain amount of time to get a new one in before the food's spoiled, right? So, yeah.
Crystal?
Well, it has been a learning experience as I sit on the Drumheller Housing Administration Board as a town councillor. So I'm learning every day about our needs in our community for low income housing, rent supplement housing. And I've had tours of properties that are recently vacated and what they look like as over time places get damaged. It happens. But then I see what your employees, your staff do to make that a very nice rental home, like compared to other properties we have. So I appreciate what your team does to ensure that they're not just clean, but they're safe homes to live in. And the checklist that has to go through is quite extensive. So I it's hard to see that waiting list because I know there's probably even more extensive waiting lists that's not captured here today that we're lacking of this type of housing in our community. So hopefully we can come up with a solution here soon.
Patrick?
Just sort of following up on Crystal's comments too, and I appreciate that you are looking for grants and looking for ways to do projects. But is there a threshold that we are at that we would really want to be aggressively pursuing more, or?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of needs that we have that Drumheller Housing or these houses have never met. One is these are independent housing, so you have to be able to get a utility bill in your name, if you've had trouble with utility bills previously, these houses aren't really helpful to you. Um, and also independent living. So there's a gap between like where darts helps people that have they're not independent living, and they bridge that gap. We've worked with darts in a couple of scenarios, but I think that there's a missing gap there between the darts capabilities and independent housing with Drumheller housing. I think that there's also the 1 bedrooms. We just uh, if a single person comes and is looking for a house, we just don't have a solution for them. Sure, we could put them in a 4 bedroom if it was available, but then we take that 4 bedroom away from a house that really needs the housing. And in Drumheller, there's very few 3 bedroom and 4 bedroom housing. Most of the rental stock in all of Drumheller is in the 2 bedroom kind. Sometimes, if somebody moves away from the community and they have a 4 bedroom house and they just put it up for rent, they're actually just a reluctant landlord. They didn't plan on being a landlord. They couldn't sell their house for what they wanted, so they put it up on for rent for a while. So those houses come and go, and then we're stuck. Where do we put this 4-person family? But I think it'd be really. We would love to work with the housing strategy, and I believe we have a meeting coming up with that organization, that the contractor. But just to kind of outline some of these things that we're seeing, I think that if we were to have double the stock of affordable housing and subsidized housing, I think it would fill immediately. I don't think that you can look at like the vacancy and say this is so we only need 3 more units. I think that it's people move to the community because of subsidized housing, and I think that that there's a lot of people who've over the years qualified, but we didn't have any availability, and then they found something else or moved out of the community.
Tom?
Thank you, Your Worship. Which brings me to Sandstone. It was just being completed when I first got on council. So, how did that come about? Who lobbied? Who got it done? How?
Happy to answer what I know. I just risk that I'm going to offend somebody that I miss out. But Ray Romanutz, Karen Bertamini, and Ray Page are the 3 names that came in all of my minutes that I read. And Karen was on council, and Ray was formerly on council, but he was managing, and Ray Romanutz from administration. And I believe it's about a $4 million construction project that they got a 50-50 matching grant, and then some of the in-kind work was from the workers of the penitentiary, some inmates that came down to do some framing and electrical, working with the main contractor. Rotary Club put in some money, CMHC put in money, Alberta Real Estate Foundation, which is from all the realtors in town. We all contribute every year to the Real Estate Foundation, and then it contributes back. I think all of those foundations or all those donors are probably still out there, but the costs are, it's probably a $6 million building now. And then remember, that's affordable. And what the community, affordable housing is great if that's possible, but the subsidized housing is where these houses have been, like the negotiation was done in the 70s, and then it took 50 years for those houses to be handed to you. And the key is the government pays the shortfall. So if someone is paying $120 a month in rent, it's probably cost the municipality $800 to have them in there. So then that shortfall is actually paid for by Alberta Housing. And that's the key, is that funding, to our knowledge, is not available or readily available. And if we were to lobby, we would most likely want to lobby for more of that based on our circumstances as a community.
Also, Seniors Foundation, we get overtures from the provincial government on a regular basis that we should amalgamate with DHA.
Yeah.
And we had actually one ultimatum here, I don't know, a year or 2 ago, that said, when your CAO retires, you're not going to be able to hire a new one. You're going to have to amalgamate. And I think they've actually backed off on that one. But we regularly get these comments from the provincial government. I would be interested in your comments on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Great question. So one is the Ray Page originally asked me if I wanted to take over the management of this, and I was told by others, don't do it. It's not doesn't help your business, and it's a struggle. I really like the maintenance, the upkeeping of the properties. Cass is amazing with the tenants. Thank you for for doing what you do. But the um, every time that comment has come up 3 times in since 2009, and every time we would say, okay, well, here's the financials. You tell us if we merge, what are we saving? Because it doesn't cost them anything to have me there. So um, the um, the other thing is that there's, I believe, the organization of Seniors Foundation it's the surrounding municipalities that are part owners in that, versus Drumheller Housing, especially now, is just the town of Drumheller. So that would have to be worked out. And then like if a maintenance guy comes and replaces a set of taps and it costs $50, it doesn't cost any more whether we're amalgamated or not. I think that the difference is that on rental housing, you are managing based on the Alberta Residential Tenancies Act. In Seniors Foundation, I think you're actually care and compassionate, and it's like more of nursing, and it's more about the care of the person than it is providing the housing. So I think there's two separate interests, but we we don't think we'd be able to do what the Seniors Foundation does, and we also don't know that the Seniors Foundation wants to look after what we do. But where it's administered, or like, I think every time you try to merge two things together is for economies of scale or for to save some money, and that's I think every time it comes up, it's only reason they bring it up is because all across Alberta, most of the municipalities are together in one building, but we show them, here's the financials and here's what our expenses are, and so what would you cut? So
Anybody else? I just got a few comments. So first off, I just want to clarify when Tom said CAO, that's the seniors CAO, correct? That's what you're referring to? Okay. Um, and then I just want to reiterate to the listening public that like everything that the Drumheller Housing is all government regulated, all government monitored, all government analyzed. So really, as a municipality, we have no say in the pricing, who can, they just have to hit the criteria, correct? Okay. As well, I just want to thank the board, a bunch of volunteers from the community who are just passionate about making sure that there's housing for people that need it. And I think that I was just talking to a gentleman today actually who reinforced that if we built another sandstone, it would be filled. So, that's obviously something we're looking at through the housing strategy. And then finally, I just want to congratulate you and your team. I mean, I've lived in the valley my whole life, and you guys have taken all of those facilities, all of those homes. I mean, as Crystal, I'll reiterate. I mean, it's given people a place to live that's safe, respectful, looks good. Just thank you. I mean, it's there's not enough words to say the difference of the way they look. So
yeah.
just thank you to everybody, all your maintenance guys. I mean, obviously they're very passionate about what they do, because it's just incredible how the respect that you guys give people that are, I mean, they don't choose to be in those situations. Um, and hopefully, after listening to the CIBC, I mean, hopefully we've got, and a year ahead of us, still difficult, but somehow we can together get through it. So thank you for everything you guys do. It's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, one of the greatest pleasures we have is when we see someone in the community who needed that space really, like something changed in their life, like you said, a divorce or a family breakup of some kind. They get a safe house, they then go get a great job, they build up finances, then their life changes and they move on. We know that, obviously we don't advertise who that person is or what it is, but we understand that exactly when that housing was helpful, and like those ones don't get reported. All we get is, oh, you know, I've got a 14-day eviction notice, but because I didn't pay rent or whatever. So you know, we try to keep a very compassionate hand, but knowing that we're all of the value of the work we're providing is for those circumstances where it's housing in need, short term, for people in the community.
Yeah, and that's the goal of it is the bridge. You know, you don't really want them, the goal is to get them to a better life in the sense of that they, you know, get the independence, self-respect, all that other stuff. So,
Yeah.
but you know, it's a bridge that's we've got to have, and I'm proud that the way you guys look after it. So thank you. All right, council, anything else? Okay, well, thank you both for coming in and visiting. Okay. I think the snow is supposed to stop, they say, in a couple hours, so. Okay, well, we shall move on to 7.11, please, Daryl.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the first request for decision in front of you is for the disallowing of the library bylaws. So for everyone's recollection, so town of Drumheller, way back 100 years ago or so, created the library under the Libraries Act. One of the things that the library does is creates a set of bylaws for their facilities, and because it's under the governance of the town has to accept or so they don't approve them, but they can disallow them. And so we've had quite a bit of discussion earlier this fall around the bylaws that the library board passed, specifically around safety and masking and things like that. And so what we're doing is we're bringing forth, in order for them to make a change, because they have passed the bylaws at their board level, it's up to council to disallow the changes to happen, which then sends it back to the board for them to make the required amendments to bring them back for council. So when we had Emily and the chair and Cheryl here, they said they were willing to do that, but we needed to follow the process first of disallowing. So what I'm looking for is a motion to have council disallow the public library bylaws.
Motion, please. Tom?
Just point of order. Should this not be a motion in the positive and then defeated like we usually do?
No, if you look
No.
at the Library Act, it has to say
So
disallow.
it's specifically, we make a motion to disallow.
That's right. That's specific as the
Yeah,
mayor
just
says.
a little bit unusual, eh?
Yes.
So I will make that motion, that council disallow the proposed Town of Drumheller Public Library bylaws.
Seconder, please. Crystal, comments? All in favor? Carried. 7.1.2, please, Daryl.
Okay, just give me 1 second to get to it. So the next three requests for decisions are basically the road closure bylaws that we've all grown to know and love this year, coming through council. So these are three bylaws that are required. So this first one is at 9th Street Northwest. So this is Midland. This is required to close a little piece of public right-of-way at the south end of 9th Street Northwest to allow for the berm to be constructed across that edge of the road. So what we're, as a reminder, just to summarize all three of them, the town for the berm construction needs to be on land that it owns as part of the agreement with the province and federal government. And so a public right-of-way is owned by the province, which needs to be transferred to the town. And the only way it can be done is through a road closure bylaw. So the first one is requesting that council gives first reading to bylaw 1922, the 9th Street Northwest road closure, and sets a public hearing date for December the 19th, 2022.
Thank you, Daryl. Can I get a motion, please? Patrick?
Motion the council give first reading to 9th Street Northwest Road Closure Bylaw 19.22 and set the public hearing date for December 19th, 2022.
Seconder, please. Tony? All in favor? Carried. And I just want to remind the listening public that on first reading, council does not comment. This is our way of getting it on the table so that it can go to public hearing. Okay, Daryl, next one.
Next one is the 2022 bylaw, which is the East Cooley River Drive road closure on the west end of the road. So this is a little bit like, for those who remember, Midland or Newcastle road closure bylaws, where the berm and riverbank is considered part of the road right of way. And so what we are doing as part of this is to actually, again, close a portion of the road right of way, but there will still be road open where the road exists today. So if you look on the map on page, sorry, I forget what's the page that has the drawing on it. Everything west of 7th Street is just a berm. There is no, even though there are some lots there, there actually is no road there. The road is actually accessed through 2nd Avenue. And the rest of the way is is narrowing the road to allow for the construction of the berm, but there will still be access to all of those properties that front River Avenue or River Drive there. So if I get a motion.
Motion, please. Crystal?
I move that council gives first reading to East Cooley River Drive West Road Closure Bylaw 20.22 and set the public hearing date for December 19th, 2022.
Seconder? Patrick? Comment? Or sorry, no, can't comment. All in favor? Carried. Okay, third one.
All right, and last but not least, 2122 is the east end of River Drive in East Cooley as well. So again, these are a couple of little pieces of roadway that extend down towards the river, and so it's closing those pieces off again to allow the berm to be constructed across there to protect East Cooley. So
Motion, please. Tony?
I move that council give first reading to East Cooley East End Road Closure Bylaw 21.22 and set the public hearing date for December 19, 2022.
Seconder? Crystal? All in favor? Carried. All right. Now, before we go into the next one, I don't say this often enough, probably in public, but I try to acknowledge. But Denise, thank you for all you do. Poor Denise puts these packages over and over and over together for us, and there's just not enough thank you for the work that goes into it. So appreciate what you do for us. Okay, now let's move on to the big one. Mauricio, 7.2.1, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight, we are pleased to present the 2023 draft of the capital budget and 10-year capital plan. I will be sharing my screen for my presentation. So the proposed 2023 budget includes 39 projects, and they total up about $8.3 million. This is slightly below what the 2022 capital budget was. And basically, it includes any projects that we feel that need to occur in 2023 based on a number of factors, whether it's a replacement or whether we need an addition to our current infrastructure. It is important to note that the 2023 capital budget does not include anything related to flood, which was approved by council in 2020. Every year, we identify any projects that might need to be done in conjunction with the work that is being done as part of the 2023 capital projects, and try to coordinate those with the flood mitigation office. In 2023, we don't see anything that needs to be coordinated as part of the budget. Before I forget, I want to thank all departments for submitting their capital budget request forms. We compile all those and we provided that information to council for further information about each project. Since for this presentation, I won't be going in a lot of detail for each project, but we will be open for questions at the end of my presentation. I also want to thank the members of the finance department for helping putting all this together. We have our intern here joining us tonight. He was helping with the capital budget, and yeah, he's been learning a lot and helping out a lot. Continuing on, just a little bit of history on the capital budget. So in the past, we have been the town has been investing about $77 million. So that's about $7 million per year. What is important to note is not the past, but more like what's coming down in the future. And in the next 10 years, as you will see in the capital plan, we are forecasting that we are going to need about $10 million every year. And this is in addition to any flood investments. So this is just regular town investments. I will be now moving to where I have the actual budget. Okay, so this is the 2023 capital budget. Similar to the 2022 budget, we have grouped all projects by the different areas. So if it is a new asset, if the town currently doesn't have that, we put it as a new asset for council to see that is a new investment. If some infrastructure is being replaced, we put it all together. As you can see, that totals about 3.5 million. Any upgrades or renovations to what we already have totals around 1.7 million. Then we have those life cycle replacements for equipment, machinery, any vehicles. They are all included, and that's around 1.2 million. And then we have a category called other, which is basically anything that doesn't fall within the previous categories will be under other. It typically tends to be anything relating to studies, master plans, or any other projects, as I said, that do not fall in the other categories. So as you can see, that the total is 8.3 million, as I previously mentioned. We also have on the right-hand side of Appendix 1 how we are proposing the town funds the projects. So as you can see, some of it is being funded from grants, capital grants. We have this category called other, which is basically contributions from others. And we have what is being funded with reserves. And we separate what is being funded with tax reserves and utility reserves. In 2023, we are proposing not to borrow any for any of these projects. So as you can see, there is no borrowing. On appendix number 2, you will find the capital plan. What's important to note about the capital plan is that it's a projection. Basically, it is a forecast. It's basically what we know now that we think we are going to be needing in the next 10 years. We come up with our best estimates. Now, the capital plan is something that changes every year. So if we become aware that an estimate needs to be changed, we update it every year. We also add any projects that we know we are going to be needing every year. And again, the capital plan is divided by department. So I'm going to go to the end of the capital plan and I'm going to show you what the totals are. So one thing that I want to note is that as we get, the closer we are to the current year, the more accurate we'll be regarding what's coming down. The farther we have estimates, but they will be revised, as I said. Now, I'm going to go to Appendix 3. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. If you guys have questions as Mauricio goes, just step in.
If
Okay?
you could just back up to the previous layout that you had there. Just to clarify here, your columns, the 2022 is actually the 2023 capital budget we're talking about? Is the dates along that line
Yes,
incorrect?
yes, that is correct. That's a typo. We
Okay.
will be correcting that next time we bring
So
it.
everything shifts over
Right.
one, okay. I
Right.
assume that because the numbers kind of lined up, but then I said, well, 2022, we're just about done.
That's
Okay.
correct.
I'm sure Dave Brett can't get all this done in a couple of months here. Thank you.
Thank you for catching that. That's exactly it. That's a 2023, 24, 25, 26, and so on. The last year is 2032. Again, we'll be making that correction at the next time we present. So for appendix number 3, is what I mentioned. It basically lets you know what's been invested and what we are projecting to invest in the next 4 years, including 2022 and 2025. And I say 2022 because we haven't finished the year yet, so we don't have a total for capital investments yet. Appendix number 4 is an important one that I want to mention. I want to talk a little bit about. So in the previous years, as you can see, the town has been able to grow reserves from 2012 all the way to 2021. What I want to mention is because the investments are going to be significant in the upcoming years, we can see those reserve balances dropping as we move forward. And that would make sense because we are investing more than in the past. As I said, in the past, the average was around 7 million. And in the future, we are expecting that it's going to be around 10 million. So we can see that those reserves balances are going to start dropping as we move forward. On appendix number 4, I believe it is, number 5, sorry, we can see the net reserve contributions. So basically what that is whatever we contribute minus whatever we take out is what the net contributions is. As you can see, every year it's been in the positive. Now in 2022, we expect to be flat. And going forward, we expect it to be a bit in the negative, meaning that we'll be taking more money out of the reserves than we'll be putting in. So that explains why in the previous appendix, we would be going down. And finally, the last appendix that I have is basically where we are with long-term debt. So as you can see, we have been declining every year. As we pay down the debt and we take less debt, it goes down. So we have brought it down from 12 million all the way to just over 6 million. However, that's going to be changing as we move into future years. We are going to be borrowing more funds. Now, as I said in the 2023, we do not intend to borrow. However, we haven't taken some of the debt that we anticipate will be taken in the future. So in the 2 borrowing bylaws that I brought to council earlier in the year, those we are delaying the borrowing on that because we know interest rates are high. We want to delay it as far as we can. However, we know that at some point we'll need to take those funds out and the balances will go up. That's a high-level overview of the budget, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, Tony, you want to start?
Just on that last chart that you covered there, the escalations of borrowings. Now, refresh my memory, the borrowing bylaws were to do with the flood mitigation contributions primarily?
That's correct. 5 million for flood mitigation and 1.2 million for the pen booster station,
Right.
I believe.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. Yep. If you got more, go ahead.
Okay, just a couple of questions on the capital budget that you covered. I'm on page 65. We're noting a downtown area revitalization plan, the vehicle access. I assume that's the intersection at Friesen's extending to Railway Avenue. If I could just have some clarity on that cost. We have $1 million allocated this year plus another 1.15 next year, a $2 million roadway. Can you cover that?
I will let our Director of Infrastructure Services, Dave, answer that.
So on the DART projects, we tried to group them all into one area because we're kind of viewing DARP as a program more than individual projects because it's such a council priority. There was actually 2 road accesses that were identified as to have work on them. So the two allotments under road access are actually the 2 separate entrances. One that was allocated for 1 year, one for the second. So the one entrance was the new road at the Friesen Brother lights, for lack of, I can't remember the exact intersection that's name, that would take that across to Railway Avenue. The other intersection that had identified upgrades, changes, and some artistic entrance stuff was 5th Street at the intersection of the lights by the Highway 10 and 5th Street. I can't remember what's there for. By the liquor land, yeah. So those ones were the 2 things that were in DARP that were accessed as entrances. So we for acquiring land, building it, because there's fairly on the Friesen Brother ones, there's a fairly significant elevation change that needs to be accounted for, and then the other entrance had both changes to the intersection at rail improvements along that road and bring people onto Railway Avenue, as well as a decorative entrance there as part of that project. That one is the 1.5 was what our thoughts were at this point in time. So we identified it as road access, but it's actually 2 separate road accesses.
Thanks for the clarity there. I guess what I'm thinking here is with the ongoing Riverside Drive debate and trying to keep that road open, there's going to be some additional costs there that are going to be significant that won't be covered by the flood program. I'm just thinking it may be prudent rather than to tag that we just kind of put a place marker there until we know where we are with that downtown dike and the costs that we may have to be looking at to cover.
Okay, as I said, in our current plan layout, the entrance at the 5th Street was the second year, would have been in the 24 year. So there's another year before we get to the specific design stuff on that. But on the large issue of the DARP stuff, looking at all the projects that are there and trying to figure out a way to manage those in a consistent fashion, administration is having some conversations about what the best way of doing that is with our current resources and the expectations of public engagement and stuff that are going on there. So there's some discussions that we need to figure out exactly how we want to execute that overall program, which is why we've grouped them in the budget plan. We've grouped all of the DARP stuff into one kind of section.
Okay, and I don't have a problem with placing it there and having a marker. I just want to be assured we have some flexibility once we know where the downtown dike costs come in and the additional costs that we're going to be responsible for that won't be covered by the program.
So right now we don't have anything to account for that in any of the DARP projects, but should there be additional funding required, we would have to identify that as coming from somewhere, whether it be roads or the DARP stuff. The DARP stuff was kind of specifically intended for the downtown area revitalization plan projects that came out of that bylaw. So right now, these projects are the ones drawn directly from that bylaw list. So if additional projects are identified from that, we would have to add them on.
So are you saying we have no ability to pivot?
No, I think, sorry if I could just interject. So Tony, I know your question. So your question is that if the project for Riverside Drive is going to cost us more, like our portion of more costing the town more, where's that
Where's that going to
placeholder
come
in
from?
here, right?
Yeah.
And so what we would do is that would be part of our borrowing piece, that is part of the 5 million that we'd be borrowing for. We would just come back with another borrowing bylaw to borrow more money for it. So
Okay, so we shouldn't earmark anything for it now.
we don't know what that's going to cost, and we don't know what our partners, the province and federal government, will contribute to that portion of it. So it's a little premature, and we don't have a good cost estimate at all, right? That's where we're all working on. So I think that'll be one of those pieces that comes early next year once the design's a little tighter. So.
All right. I just had one other question, but we can move on to and come back. No, it's an easier one for Dave. So the East Cooley snow dump site and its probability of fencing that. So that'll be for the storage of snow and trees. And your intent is to perhaps have equipment out there?
So the intention of the East Cooley snow dump is right now we have 3, 4. Keep forgetting which it is. These 3 snow dumps, but they're all located in the core area of Drumheller. So we would like to have a additional snow dump in East Cooley, so we're not hauling stuff all the way back. So during winter period, it would be a snow dump. During summer period and rest of the year, when we're working out in East Cooley, right now we attempt to cram, if we're working multi-day project out there, we basically cram everything into the wastewater treatment facility that's out there, which is not intended for that. And it's a fairly small site. So we would use the snow dump as basically an auxiliary yard as well as being a snow dump. The intention is to get something that would be properly built as a snow dump, but also fenced with trees around it so it's not an eyesore, because it's basically would be an industrial laydown type of yard, so that it would be presentable and attractive and not a detriment to the visual. I've totally taken the sentence somewhere I wasn't thinking it was going to go. It would not be a detriment to the optics of East Cooley.
Okay, well, that was one of the concerns, the aesthetics there. I guess my requirement for that the area be fenced. Do you have intentions of putting equipment out there?
We intend to fence it so that we can use it as a secured storage area for our equipment that's working out there. So yes, there will be.
And we're not worried about vandalism even with the fence? Like how many times?
Account for that, but we would have to identify it. We intend on putting the snow dump in proximity to the bulk water station, so we should be able to run cameras or items out there to make it a secure site. That's the intention of it.
Okay, good.
Tom was next.
Just further to the comment on the downtown dike, could we not take some money out of our street improvement program to top that up if we needed it, like we did for the trail section to Walmart out of the sidewalk program? Anyway, just a thought. You don't have to answer it. Just a comment.
I'll make a comment. It's possible if we are directed to do so, we can do so. However, I'd like to identify the $850,000 that we currently have assigned to the street improvement on an ongoing basis is probably just barely enough to keep up with our aging infrastructure as it is. So taking the money from that and putting it onto the other project, while we would do it if council directs us, that would mean that the other work that's outstanding on the street improvement side would get additional annual delays while we tried to catch up. It's as simple as that. It would be, to do that, we would be postponing doing other roads additional years.
Yeah, fully understand. $850,000 gives us what, about 2 blocks worth of paving now? Whereas 10 years ago, it used to give us 5 different projects. Fully understand that. I guess where I'm coming from, however, is that we have been fairly adamant that if and when we do this downtown dike, that it won't cost extra money. So we're just trying to make it so that it doesn't cost extra money. We don't have to borrow anymore. So that's just where I'm coming from. I have a whole bunch of questions. Can I go, or do you want to spread them out, or?
Go ahead, and you might ask
Are
all
you
the
gonna
other
go
ones
to
and everybody
sleep?
else, unless somebody else has just got a couple, and then maybe wipe off a couple off your list. Okay, Stephanie's got, let's let her go, and then we'll see where you're at.
Thank you for the report. I was just wondering about the Bankview water tower. I read there's like the slope protection and stuff, but I was just wondering if we're upgrading it, and I just somehow missed reading that.
So this year we conducted a study of all of our water towers. So the 4 concrete ones and the steel one. All of them are in better shape than the consultant was expecting to see for their ages, but they all do still have some items that need work on them. So specifically for the Bankview one, it's not an upgrade, it's maintenance work and to fix those deficiencies. However, at the Bankview one, the slope on the west side has sloughed several times, given away several times in the past. It is now getting to the point where it is still safe from a structural perspective of the tower, of the reservoir there. However, another slough or two, and it will no longer be within what is considered acceptable engineering standards to support the foundation there. So we need to be doing something at that area to stabilize that bank to protect that facility.
Okay, will we be doing anything to increase the water pressure in Bankview?
That would be a separate item. That would be.
It's in the 2024 budget.
I think it's in the 24 budget where there is a Bankview booster station.
Thank you.
Okay.
Crystal?
Just 2 quick ones. The 5th dressing room at the arena and looked like in 2024, new construction of a baseball diamond. Those could really determine after this Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and that could be shifted as well, just like anything else.
So the 5th changing room, council had directed us last year.
Yep.
Last year to do that. The funding, the estimates that we originally did were probably a little on the low side, and then inflation hit and they were more than a little on the low side. We're trying to continue getting that done because the commitment instruction was made by council, so that's why that's in there. Depending on the results from the master plan that comes out, there may be other additional thoughts or changes on that. Prior to the thought of for the baseball diamond, that was put in there last year because for the 22 plan, it was put in as a long-term one for 23 because there's some discussion about at the time there's some thought that there might be a ball diamond getting affected or modified because of the berm work. So we put $1 million in there as a placeholder for an additional diamond should one be needed. We've left it in there because we didn't really want to pull it out because once the master plan is done, it may very well indicate that one is needed. So it was one of these things where it's not a 23 one, so we were going to leave it alone until we saw the full outcome from the master plan.
Okay, no, that answered that question. And the new trail development, does that follow under sidewalk
No, there is a specific line for trails.
I must have missed it,
in
sorry.
there. So there is a sidewalk line, but there is a specific line for trail development, I think it was called, under parks.
Oh, thank you. I just completely missed it. Those were my questions. Thanks.
Patrick, you got any short ones you want to ask? Anyway, not yet. All right, I guess you get to go, Tom.
Thank you, Your Worship. Don't fall asleep on me, please. So my first comment would be, with the exception of a couple of things like the street improvement program, virtually all of these costs are tax supported. So that means that taxpayers are coming up with this money, and we are intending spending this money this year, possibly taking some out of reserves, as you have said. And what I'm getting at, of course, is if we look at the operating budget, and it looks like there could be some big expenses there, we might have to revisit the capital budget and maybe delay some of these projects, and that would give us more money to work with. Is that a fair assessment?
When it comes to reserves, yes, you are correct. If you delay some of the projects, there'll be more funds left in the reserves, and they can be used either for future projects or they can be used for any needs on the operating side. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the projects that we are proposing, most of them, we identify them as with a high criticality, meaning that they do need to be done ASAP. And some of them may be delayed for 1 year, but I know that delays everything else in the plan too. So it is always a possibility, but there are always consequences on delaying things.
Yeah, no, what I'm getting at is that we might have to come back to this, like we're not making a final decision tonight. We're not, that's going to depend on the operating budget as well. So
That's
my first point. And just again, to refresh everyone's memory, that a 1% tax increase to all the taxpayers in Drumheller gives the town about $90,000. Is that a fair?
That's right, about 90,000.
Yeah, so when we're looking at some of these projects that are, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to make that relative, that's a 2% tax increase, that's a 3% tax increase. I'm just kind of putting it in that context that we have to kind of continually think about that. A couple of other comments, further to Tony's snow dump in East Cooley, the $200,000. This will create, I guess, what I'm going to refer to as a nice space, so that in the summer when there's not snow there will be a fence, there will be some landscaping, there will be, you know what I'm kind of getting at? Like we've had that discussion with the water plant, we've had that discussion with the wastewater plant, that'll be along the same kind of lines, that this will be not just a bare chunk of ground that you pile snow on and then leave it and it'll grow weeds all summer.
That is correct. The intention is to not have it as a detriment to the optics of to the visual attractiveness of the area.
The Sterling Ditch. Explain to me the Sterling Ditch in Nackmine.
So the Sterling Ditch is a section of land in Nackmine that runs from Hunter Drive to the Red Deer River. Prior to Dagan coming on board with the flood office, the intention was to try and work it into the flood project. However, that's not eligible anymore. The Sterling Ditch is in a section of land that is owned by the town of Drumheller. However, over the past years of its life, however many decades or whatever that was, it has shifted. So it's not as centered in its right of way as it should be. It's also not flowing as well as it should be. So the intention is to, in conjunction with the flood work that's going on, to get that ditch and an attached ditch on Second Avenue working and flowing properly, because that Sterling Ditch brings drainage from the highway, the upper valley plateau, all through that section, and then quite a bit of Nackmine drains through it as well. So we want to correct the issues with that ditch and fix those so that it is easier to maintain. It's not as such as an eyesore, and it's not continuing to move out of the allotted land for it and disrupt the neighbors.
Okay, thank you. Further to Crystal's comments on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, I think, as she mentioned, that this master plan, and as you mentioned, will drive capital spending on Parks and Recreation for Drumheller for many years. And to put in the $1 million for baseball, no problem. But I can see a number of, suggestions coming out of that we'll spend $1 million for baseball in 2024 and $1 million on pickleball in 2025 and $1 million. I got it in there, didn't I? You know what I'm saying is that I think that Parks and Recreation Master Plan will really show us what the needs and wants are of this community, and where we should be spending capital money for a number of years. Under the wastewater treatment plan, you have a master plan for, I'm just wondering what that is. I'm kind of hopeful. I've been kind of banging this drum for a few years on effluent water use. And just for an example, when I see water trucks full of beautiful, pure, clean, potable water spraying roads to keep the dust down, that to me is a crime. That's a crime against humanity. I mean, there are billion people in this world that would die for that water, and here we are spraying it on roads. Is that wastewater treatment master plan, would it cover something like that, that we could maybe make use of that, even, putting tanks where we could use that water to water our baseball diamonds, or stuff like that, make use of that water rather than just pumping it all back into the river?
So the primary need for the wastewater treatment plant master plan is we have requirement under the permitting process that we have with Alberta Environment to have a master plan for how we're going to treat the water, how we're going to grow to handle wastewater growth through time for the upcoming permitting period. So that in addition to that permitted requirement, we also, you look on the 10-year plan, the water and the wastewater get a little weak after year 5 because our old plan is starting to run to the end of its life. So this is what will allow us to develop and improve the plan for the next 10 years beyond that. That being said, the thought of water reuse is definitely an option that we can be looking at, and we very likely will be looking at, because as you said, as we move forward, water will become potable, drinkable water will become a much more valuable resource as time continues to go by. Climate change will dictate that. So you're right, there is opportunities for reuse there. There's opportunities to have potential revenue stream out of it and things like that. But we also do have an obligation to return. I can't remember if it's exactly how it's written in our permit, but there is to an extent an obligation to return some to the river under requirements. So we'll have to look at those options. But it is something that we can look at. But that was not the intention of that current wastewater master plan. But it's something that we can include there as potential revenue reuses and other reuses of that cleaned water. That being said, to clean the water to the point where we can return it to the river is one standard. To clean the water to the level where it counts as being able to be used for irrigation purposes or watering purposes is a different treatment standard. So it may trigger, to do that may require some additional work from at the plant, which would trigger additional capital expenditures. But until we look into it more detailed, I can't answer the full details of that. But we can definitely make sure that we ask the consultant of the options and the need of the things that we would need to do in order to allow for that possibility.
Keep you on the spot here, the asset retirement obligation study for 80,000, what's that all about?
So I can answer that partly, but that one actually mostly comes from
Oh.
Mauricio. So my understanding, Mauricio can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is from financial standards nationally, we should have, when you have an asset, I will use town hall as an example. You build town hall, you have a cost of construction for it. Then you have the life cycle of operating it. At the end of its life, there needs to be in financial standards, there needs to be a cost of decommissioning that. So knocking it down and returning it to a redeveloped state. This is a requirement for financial standards. So we should have one of these reports for all facilities that we own. So we need to generate these reports for Town Hall, BCF, Aquaplex Arena, our water plant, our reservoirs, anything where we've got a man-made structure constructed, we need a retirement report for. And this money is to develop those reports, as at the moment we don't have too many of them.
My last general comment, and this is for Jay Garbett, who is probably watching. I know he will be extremely disappointed to see that our reserves are going to be going down, down, down. Because we spent many years trying to build up those reserves to what we felt was going to be an acceptable level. So that's a little bit disappointing, and also increasing the long-term debt. Again, we tried not to do that as much as possible. But I guess my comment to that would be, times are tough. like wow, like we are in a little bit of a different world out there. That the prices of things have just gone crazy, and for the town to continue to do what it does, and we do a lot of things, that it's just unfortunately going to cost a whole bunch more money. So it's unfortunate, but that's the reality that I think we live in. Thank you again for the very good presentation, very clear. And
If I could just respond to Tom's comment there, I appreciate the comment. In addition to everything you said there, I'd also like to point out that whether we like it or not, we have an aging infrastructure. So roads, pipes, the river crossings, several of the lift stations and the sanitary side, they've all they are all reaching at or beyond their end of design life. So we can either replace, repair, or update those in a planned fashion, or we will be doing it on midnight on Christmas Day in the middle of the blizzard because it always breaks at the worst possible time. And that is more expensive than doing it in a planned fashion.
Stephanie?
If I can add
Oh.
to Dave's comments, and to your comments, Councilor Zariski, yes, reserves will be decreasing in the future, and we know partly why that's going to be the case. Exactly what you said. The costs are higher than they used to be. That's one. Another factor would be if things were delayed and now we need to do them. That also plays a role because that infrastructure needs to be replaced or upgraded. Um, when it comes to borrowing, we always try to uh, leave it as something that we can use, but only for specific projects, right? Anything that is large in nature, anything that we know that it should be shared by multiple generations rather than one generation. So we try to be very mindful on when we use borrowing as a funding source.
Thanks, Mauricio. Steph?
I was just looking under the Badlands Community Facility, a photocopier for 20,000, and then over 2 years for office space 60,000. Are these actual needs or just wants? Because $80,000 is almost 1% tax increase.
So photocopiers, especially ones that get used extensively, do cost a significant amount of money. Daryl, do you know how much the last high capacity photocopier we purchased was?
It's about 16,000.
For office, in the question of office space at BCF, currently we have for office space at the BCF for staff to use, we have office for the manager, and then we have 4 people crammed into a room behind the manager. The field house has 4 changing rooms that were meant for locker rooms for the team events in the field house. One of those has always been allocated to the staff as a break room because there's not actually a break room constructed as part of the BCF. So we have been finding over the last several years that the BCF has a shortage of effective office space and staff space in order to allow them to do their work effectively. So that's what the intention of the office space thought is, in order to find a way to fit some additional offices in there without it just being putting up cubicle walls in a portion of the lobby type of thing. We're trying to find a way to maintain that building, keeping its lead standard and the architectural standards of the building to keep it looking as good as it has been for the community, while still allowing staff to have enough space to carry out their jobs.
Thank you.
Patrick?
I just want to say thank you for this, and I understand the the need to deal with the aging infrastructure, and I also understand the nature of a 10-year capital plan being things become more accurate as they get closer. when we do look at some of the larger numbers with 24, 25, and 30, I think it's important to note that many of those projects are grant dependent, that those aren't going to be ones that will be funded from our reserves at this point. And even the Fifth Avenue lift station, there could be possibilities for granting for that as well, right?
Yeah, any of the larger projects such as the additional work on different bridges, the lift stations, the pump stations, we will do everything we can to get grant funding for. But with grant funding, it is all dependent on other parties, such as the provincial and federal governments, as deeming them as eligible and approving the grant application for them.
So if
Go
I
ahead.
may add a little more to what Dave said, for the 2023 capital budget, even though we do not have, some of the projects do not have grant funding identified as a funding source, we'll continue to seek grants to be able to minimize the impact on the reserves. So I think an example of that would be DARP, right? That's what the plan is. Right now, we have it identified as being funded from reserves, but the plan is to seek grants and see how we can, whatever we can find to fund the project.
Very good. And yeah, that's a good point that Pat makes. Like in 2024, there's that 8 million for Bridge 10. It's grant dependent. I mean, so if you take the total down, you're back down to 8 million or just over. So, you know, that's, I think people, if they're reading that real close, they just got to remember we do push to get grants on everything we can. I just want to accentuate the East Cooley snow dump because that was something that I really appreciate that's in here because people get tired of seeing our trucks go all the way out to East Cooley with snow and they come back and so that's, although it's a cost up front, it's a huge cost saving at the end on staff, equipment, repairs and maintenance, etc. So it's great to see that in, and I'm please make sure we do. If we got to use some of our 5-to-1 trees to make sure that ends up being a beautiful area along with the water plant that's there right now. Um, I just want to comment on the long-term debt. Although we are legally allowed to borrow up to 32 million and we're only at 7.1, and even though we may need to borrow some to get some of these projects done, we're well under the threshold of where we other municipalities are at the max. So, you know, kudos to all past councils who've continually watched that. I would like to just reinforce too with the listening public that if they're checking that as well, they'll see the funds that are set aside for the CN bridge and the other bridges, as well as the trail. And as a CN task force, we're working on that. So hopefully we can raise those funds and then that will come off of these totals as well. And it just really points out that you know, when we look at the costs, like there's 1.5 million that just got upgrade some of those water things, and the pressure that has been put on you guys by the Provincial Water Act and those organizations of how we have to change the whole way of doing it. So yeah, it's unfortunate when you look at some of these things, you wish you could not have to worry about water and wastewater and all these lift stations and things that we as residents don't visually put any effort into, but when we need the water and we want it good. So yeah, those are things. And then yeah, on the parks and recreation, I think it's really something that we have to remind future councils. It is they're big projects. Many are grant related. At this time, we don't see anything the province or the feds have put out on Parks and Rec, not like certain things they've done in the past. So again, administration's continually watching for that. And if something like that comes up, obviously we'll jump all over it. So yeah, overall, I think it's a great presentation. I know there's a lot of work that's been done. I appreciate all the effort that's been put in, especially Dave. A bulk of this unfortunately is under your purview as usual. But you're the best spender that we have. So thank you for that. Gotta put that in. Sorry, Dave. But no, great presentation, great work, Mauricio, by you and your team. Thanks so much. And this is a really, really, I can never commend you enough on the information you give us because it's just very easy to follow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to mention that I will be bringing the capital budget and capital plan at least once more this month for input from council. And then the plan is to bring a final budget for adoption once council has given enough input. I was hoping to do that at the end of the month, the final meeting. However, the operating budget will be coming until December. So maybe what we'll do is we'll get input from council and we'll hold the final presentation to December when we bring the operating budget so that they are both adopted at the same time.
Okay, we're still going to, this is still all going to be done by Christmas. Perfect, Mauricio. Okay, and everybody else in administration. I know we're putting pressure on, but we got to get in that cycle. So, okay, well, thank you again, and let's move on since we've got Catherine and Patrick online. So let's move on to 7.3.1, please. Catherine, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
There we are. Yes, wonderful. Is Patrick with you?
He is. He's just off camera.
Okay. Okay. Well, welcome to council. I hope you're somewhere warm, and we will let you have the floor.
I start by saying good evening to everybody, and I apologize for not being there in person. However, I'm on crutches, and the snow and ice is a little bit intimidating. So, I do regret that. Let me just pull up my presentation here. There we go. It has been a year since the last presentation. It's been a different year this year. Last year we were just in the beginning of trying to rebuild traffic at the airport, and we had a lot of activities, events that happened. This year was a different year because of the major projects that happened. Okay, and that is one of the things that we will talk about. Okay. Just for those who are not aware, that outline in red is actually land that the town, that the town owns. The town of Drumheller owns what is outlined in red. Okay. About 80 acres. What we're seeing this year is that we're seeing more business traffic flying in. And that's people that are actually flying into Drumheller to conduct business. They're coming from BC, they're coming from Alberta, Northern Alberta, they're coming from Saskatchewan, okay, which is interesting. Word of mouth is spreading. We do not spend a penny on advertising. We have a Facebook site called Fly Drumheller. We have an Instagram account also called Fly Drumheller, but we also post regularly on BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan forums, pilot forums, to get the word out. We also get a lot of our feedback from those forums. One of the interesting things that we've seen this summer is a lot more word of mouth is happening. You know, so-and-so told me that we should come here. But the biggest interesting one is Alaska. We have seen a huge uptick in transient traffic between the continental United States and Alaska. And they come into Drumheller. They come into Drumheller to stay overnight. They come back to visit. And because we're not on those forums, that's obviously word of mouth. Yeah. Just when people fly into Drumheller, they need transportation. So between the transportation coming into town, they need food to eat, they need a place to stay. The economic benefits, I know, are probably a little bit difficult to provide some empirical data, but we do, and you will see this later on in the presentation, we do take stats on how many people go into town. We don't know what they do for restaurants, but we do see things like beer coming back and shopping bags. So money is being spent. Okay? This summer was difficult to plan any kind of events just because the major projects that happened between the revitalization, the paving and the lighting, those dates were outside of our control. So to plan any major events was just untenable. Okay. The paving project is the first major work that's been done in 40 years, and it impacted heavily on our traffic, but it had to be done. It entailed a 6-week closure of the airport, complete 6-week closure at the height of tourist season. So that was June, July. Okay. The lighting project, this presentation was done up a week ago, and as of today, the lighting project, with the weather, we've been advised that the forecasted cold temperatures in the coming week might delay this project. However, the electrical contractor is going to come within the next week. They're going to complete some test pits to see if it's going to be possible to get this work done this year. Otherwise, it's going to have to wait till the spring. Okay. And of course, the lighting is my own little bugbear because it really, really affects anybody being able to fly in, especially with the short days during the winter. And medical evacuation flights, STARS helicopters, okay, they really rely on lighting in these short days. Usage. Just a reminder that because this was done a week ago, the statistics for October are not yet complete. Okay, so these stats went up to the date of 24th of October. Okay. What are we seeing? First of all, for the 2022 flights, you can certainly tell just by the graphs. When we were closed, the airport was closed June and July. A huge impact on travel coming in. But one thing that the airport usage for the flights does not tell us is that we rely heavily on pilots self-reporting. And that means that they come into the terminal, they sign the register, they just give us some information like where they're from, where they're going to. That's probably about 30% of the flights that come in. They don't self-report. So we rely on reporting them ourselves if we're at the airport or we see them on camera. And I review the cameras daily to see what I can catch and add those flights in myself. The airport usage flights also does not account for any of the flights that take offs and landings by our local aerial crop sprayers. Okay, so this is just visitors to Drumheller. When we talk about commercial flights there, the commercial flights are anything from, we've got STARS, we've got RCMP, we've got government agencies, and we have aerial survey airplanes. Okay. Business people. When we go over to the airport activities on the other side, you can see again, month 5, month 6, month 7, impacted by our closures. Okay. This is where we try to get a sense for what people are doing when they come into town. So fuel purchase by far is the greatest reason why people come to Drumheller, but that's also our biggest revenue generator. Okay. We always try to encourage people to go into town by offering them rides. We have a courtesy vehicle at the airport that all we ask for is a $20 gas donation, which people are very good about doing. So that does not come out of our pocket. Anything to get them into town to visit. And people love going into town. Okay. a lot of our business is return traffic. And then of course the word of mouth, you know, to say you guys should go there. Okay. Just lost my train of thought there for a second. Crew cars, car rentals. The car rentals last year were much higher, but of course, car rentals this year are rare. We can't even get a car rental, unfortunately. And for the people that are able to, it's prohibitively expensive. So that's one of our that's one of the things that we need to work on, is just transportation to get people into town. Okay, different options. There's one cab is the cab is fairly pricey. So just things to work on for the future. Fuel sales. An airport makes most of its money on fuel sales and leases. Okay. We have been able to, as you can see, increase our fuel sales dramatically 2021 and 2022, even though we were closed for over 8 weeks this year for the runway rehabilitation and for some pressure testing that we had to have done on the fuel pumps. Okay. You'll notice a higher margin in 2022, even though the literage is almost the same so far this year. The revenue is higher, and that's because we have big tanks, which means that we're able to buy in bulk at a lower price, which means that we can sell it for a lower price, a bigger margin. You can sell it for a bigger margin. Okay. You'll notice in 2018 that there's a little bit of a rise there. It's out of the norm between 2015 and 2020. In 2018, there was fuel contamination in aviation gas, and Drumheller had gas that had not been contaminated. It was older stock, and so people knew Drumheller had gas. They came here to buy it. Okay, so that's the anomaly in 2018. Had we been able to stay open for the whole summer, for the whole tourist season, we would have easily broken 100,000 liters in sales, our fuel sales, So we're on track. We're on track to increase sales next summer again. We're looking at breaking, I don't know, $150,000 worth of 150,000 liters of fuel sales. Anything to generate revenue and help the airport be more self-sustaining, And are there any questions?
Thanks, Catherine. Questions, anyone? Go ahead, Crystal.
Well, first comment would be to thank yourself and Patrick for the amount of work you're doing, volunteering still, even though council approved in the budget last year for a full-time manager. But we also have to think about the future of the airport and what that will look like if there is a drastic increase of air traffic. We obviously need to have someone managing this, and I hope we can keep you on, both of you. But so I just want to really congratulate both of you for your hard work in increasing the traffic at the airports. And as we have seen, Travel Alberta is really pushing for more tourism in this region. So I think it's just going to increase more and more each year. So thanks again for all your hard work, both of you.
Patrick?
I'll echo the appreciation for the work that's been done up there and the great turnaround. My first term on council, I was often in the position of defending whether to even keep the terminal open at times, but especially with the fuel sales and the upgrades with the card lock have made a huge difference, especially with your help too. I guess my question is about the lighting project. And when we talk about it, is there, I don't know, would I say a demand for night operations, or is it more of a safety and a convenience thing? Or could you actually see, increases of traffic when these lights are fully installed and operational?
Absolutely. The lighting issue is multifaceted. The first thing is it's absolutely a safety issue. If you have somebody coming in inclement weather, for instance, today, if they can't see a runway, it's a safety issue. Secondly is a pilot, when you do pilot training, you have to do night operations. And without runway lighting, you can't do night operations. You can't train at night. Okay. So we do not get the flight school traffic that we would get if we had runway lights. But the biggest thing is safety. And whether it's a short winter day or inclement weather, it's a safety issue.
Thank you again.
Go ahead, Tom.
Maybe Dave could answer this. Daryl stepped out. So the town owns the airport property and it is in Starland. Does the town pay taxes to Starland?
Yes, today.
Mauricio, I'm going to pass that one to you.
Dave, we can answer it here.
Catherine and Patrick, if you can answer that.
Yeah, so there's been a deal struck between the town of Drumheller and Starland that far exceeds when we started off at the airport. But the deal is basically that each of the hangar owners pays tax to Starland County, and that tax in aggregate pays the tax for the entire airport to the county of Starland. So the town of Drumheller does not pay tax directly; it's paid through the airport hangar owners.
Excellent deal. Just to comment also on the fuel sales. So if you could explain to me and to other people who don't know, how does this work? How does the town get revenue from the fuel sales?
When we took over the fuel sales, did a quick business study on it, and basically the town had been buying in small batch quantities to keep the fuel safe and fresh for the small volume of traffic that was coming through. We determined that we would guarantee at least a 10% return on every dollar invested by the town at the airport, in particular for fuel. I think this year, right now we're running 18%. We'll probably average 13% on the dollar. So for every dollar the town provides to the airport for fuel purchases, after expenses, the town gets $1.10 back. So if you invest 150,000, you get an extra 15,000 on that. We're exceeding that quite handsomely right now, but on average, that's what we guaranteed we'd return.
So if I could just add to that, prior to Patrick taking over as the airport manager, the town always sold fuel. Airport aviation fuel is 100 LL avgas, and there is, Patrick, there's one plant that makes that in Canada, correct?
That's correct.
And that's located in Edmonton. So we have to buy, all airports buy gas from this one plant in Edmonton. We were selling it previously at a fairly high price. So we adjusted the price. It sounds counterintuitive, but we actually priced it lower, but still more than what we were purchasing it for, which greatly changed the amount of people that were purchasing it, which greatly increased our profit because we were able to become a better destination for gas. It's the same as when you're buying gas in your car. You're going to look for the lowest priced gas tank to fill up at. So by pricing ours lower than what we had previously been, we were able to pick up the quantity significantly and bring in a greater amount of revenue.
A very interesting model. Wonder if the gas stations in the town of Drumheller would use that model and sell gas in Drumheller for 30% less than other places in the province, and yet make a whole bunch more money because they'd have more people coming in.
We can't do anything about them. What else do you have?
Runway extension. I know we talked about when we had the resurfacing the runway that it might be feasible to extend that. Is that still being looked at?
Not at the moment, and there's two prongs to that. The first obviously is it's prohibitively expensive, so basically $1 million per 1,000 feet to bring it into compliance. You have the room up at the airport to extend it. The minimum distance it would have to go is from the 3,000 feet. Everything in airport is still in imperial measurement, is 3,000 feet, and it would have to go to 5,000 feet to start to bring in what they call the VLJ, the very light jet traffic. There's no study which would say that there's a high enough volume of very light jet traffic to come in to pay for that extension. What we do have is enough runway for twin turbos to come in, and that is the bulk of the higher volume, higher passenger traffic that's required to come in. That'd be like Alberta Health Services, survey companies, the RCMP, et cetera.
Anybody else? Okay, I just want to say just a reminder to council and the listening public is we were very fortunate to have support of provincial governments on a couple on those runway grants and the lighting. And thank you to Dave and Patrick and Catherine for the efforts they put into those grant writing to make that happen. So, and then for those who don't know how these guys got here, Catherine is a local gal and they moved to the valley, back to the valley, thank you, and said that we had this big opportunity that we were missing out on. And so I convinced them to both get on the airport commission. And then one thing led to another. And when you look at the 21, 22 sales, there's nobody other than those two that you can thank for that. So they have worked endlessly at the airport, give of their time, everything, and they're still doing it for nothing. So I wish you guys would figure that out because as Crystal said, we did budget that. So thank you for everything. I know that there's more that's coming forward, and Dave will bring that. But thanks both of you for everything you do for the airport in the valley, and have really changed the whole direction of that location. So thank you. All right, Dave.
If Patrick could stay on to support me for the two RFDs, that would be useful. So the next item is a request for decision, discontinuation of private fuel sales and private fuel tanks at the Drumheller Municipal Airport. This is a recommendation from the Airport Commission to Council to discontinue private fuel sales at the airport. So Patrick will correct me if I get this totally off base, but basically what it is the business model that's predominant in Western Canada and Alberta is all fuel scales go through the airport. So if there is a company or agency on the airport that's handling its own fuel, there would be a payment to the airport per liter or something to cover that. Because the fuel sales is a major aspect of how the airport gets revenue. Right now, we have allowed that in the past at Drumheller. The Airport Commission's recommendation is that we discontinue this. The additional stuff along this is concerns about is the fuel tanks being properly maintained and looked after? If there's a spill, who ends up with the responsibility of handling it and all this type of stuff? By doing it this way, it brings that under the town and gives us a greater control as well as the additional revenue stream. And as we said, this is what the industry this is what the industry practice is moving. So it's bringing us into alignment with what is the most common standard of behavior in the industry. Patrick, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that pretty well sums it up.
Okay, Dave, I'll just get a motion on the floor before we go any further. So council, can I get a motion, please, Tom?
I move that council discontinue the sale of private fuel at the Drumheller Municipal Airport and no longer allow private fuel tanks on site effective January 1st, 2023.
Seconder, please. Tony, comments? Tom?
So Dave, you're saying that like Three Hills Airport, Bicycle Airport, some of the they just have the municipal sales, just one, and they don't have private operators that have tanks and that kind of thing? Is we kind of researched that?
So Patrick, can you answer that question?
Yeah, so there's three models for fuel. One is that the airport sells all the fuel. The second is they lease out the rights to sell fuel to fixed base operators. This is generally for bigger airports that have multiple traffic streams for locations such as Springbank, where Springbank sells their fuel and then pays a fee, a circular fee back into the airport authority. And the third model is that there is not public fuel available, and thus private fuels are allowed on the tank. If you were to look at a small airport like Bicycle, roughly a smaller runway, but same size as us, a couple more hangars, they don't have any public available fuel for sale. So they receive no revenue from fuel. We supply the flight school through a deal, and their parachute club, we supply their fuel at Drumheller. That's helped with our fuel sales. But generally, yes, generally airports, it would be the equivalent of SO saying, yes, you can set up your own private pump, receive the gasoline and not pay any of the taxes or any of the profit to SO. You just have your own private pump.
Anybody else, Patrick?
Could you tell me where the closest Jet A fuel is to Drumheller?
I couldn't give you an accurate on that. Jet A is a funny fuel. A lot of places put in summer tanks when they have firefighting to come in and go for the firefighting season. Places like High River run Jet A. Springbank obviously runs Jet A. Red Deer runs Jet A. But in our quadrant, sort of our 80-kilometer sphere of influence as a airport, we would be the first Jet A provider.
If we were to decide to go that direction, would we need infrastructure upgrades to be a retailer of it, or?
Yeah, without getting into future business, we would require. We have no Jet A service provision at this time.
Anybody else? Yeah, and it's as a commission, I think the biggest thing was the safety and the risk to the town that we're taking, that has really no reason for us to take that risk. As well as the commission was very if you're running a business, you have to supply your own facilities and services, etc. So it was kind of, we're taking the risk and supplying, so we need to figure out how to do it right and make the airport more sustainable, which is what, as Patrick said, even councils two prior to this one, people didn't want to fund the airport. Now the airport's getting where it's becoming self-sustainable with the decisions the commission has made, and with obviously the help of Patrick and Catherine. Is that fair, Dave? Patrick?
Yeah, I think that like, I don't want to overemphasize the risk. I think that they have to meet the same standards. It's when we get into the public sale of fuel, when we talk about selling fuel for aircraft, it's a bit different from selling it for a vehicle, just because of the safety aspect. There's 5 years, etc. But the reason we're not selling Jet A now for revenue is because we haven't sold Jet A. Is there a market for Jet A to sell Jet A? I believe there is, yes.
All right, anybody else? Okay, all in favor? Carried. Okay, let's move on, Dave, to the next one, please.
Okay, so the next request for decision is a recommendation from the airport commission, to bring in a fee schedule. So right now at the airport, the town makes money by selling the gas, by selling the 100 LL avgas and on the lease of hangars. We do not charge pretty much any, we don't charge any other fees. This again does not align with industry standard in Western Canada and Alberta specifically. So Patrick has developed a proposed set of fee options for the airport. Should council agree to this, these would get rolled into the fee schedule document that comes forward as part of the budgeting process. So right now, the only fee that's being charged at the airport is the hangar leases. This would bring in additional things like landing fees, tie down fees, vehicle parking fees with power, without power. This is what's done at other airports, and it's a way of ensuring that the airport is meeting its duty to be financially self-sustaining without being an excessive drain on the rest of the community.
Thanks, Dave. Can I get a motion, please? Stephanie?
I move that council approve the implementation of the proposed airport fee schedule approved by the Airport Commission on October 14th, 2022 for inclusion in the town's 2023 schedule of fees.
Seconder, please. Tony, comments? Okay, I'll just, don't have any comments. I just want to just reinforce one of the discussions was the landing fee. This isn't for the small little planes that come in, land, because most of those come in into this is more for the bigger planes, correct? Dave?
That's right, Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the aircraft under 6,000 pounds, again, everything is still in imperial for anything to do with aviation. But basically 6,000 pounds is the industry standard to start charging fees above that, particularly with 6,000 pounds commercial. And so what we don't want to do is affect the general aviation aircraft below that poundage weight. That is a surefire way to kill traffic. And as we've built the storefront up and increased the traffic in front of it, we're starting to see more and more habitual users. We certainly don't want to tamper with that. This is for 6,000 up to, I believe the airport is rated for AGN2, which is 24,000 pound aircraft. That's the target audience.
Thanks for that clarity. Go ahead, Tom.
I'm glad Patrick isn't in the room here because he'll probably throw something at me if he was. I'm just wondering about other uses of the airport and fees. So for example, Hannah has drag races on their airport. Have we ever thought of anything like that? And if we did, would there be a fee for that kind of thing?
So I can answer that. Yes, we have thought of it. And is it within the realm of the possible? We started off by volunteering by saying that we weren't going to be the people that said no. Everything had a possibility. Drag racing, we came out of the Smith Falls Flying Club out of Ontario, a highly successful club, very well off financially, runs a great airport. And they ran a sporting event somewhat like that for one weekend every year. And it brought in a good amount of money. There are downsides to it. The first is putting down a lot of rubber, which is slippery onto the runway surface itself, which makes it not as good for aircraft to land on. And the second is, unfortunately, after every event, crime at the airport goes up. And so you have to weigh those two factors as we go forward. In the short term, I wouldn't suggest to council we look at that sort of event. What we'll try to do is keep building the fly-ins and the charity events, which have been very popular and have worked well for the airport. But yes, there's absolutely a possibility of running almost any event. We sponsor the walking club up at the airport. Once every 2 or 3 months, they come up and take a stroll at the airport. And I think that's great. It's all for the public.
All right, we're all good. All in favor? Carried. All right, Patrick, Catherine, as always, thank you for your time. I just, want to just send a shout out to Catherine to look after herself and quit injuring herself on those e-bikes. Seem to know somebody else who did something like that. So you guys take care of yourself and thanks again.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Okay, let's move on, Dave, to 7.3.3, please.
Because I just can't stop talking and spending money.
Yeah.
So this is a request for decision for award of the construction of the penitentiary booster station. In here is also a request for some additional funding to come forward right away because we need to award the contract because of delivery dates of materials. So the simple fact is inflation and supply chain issues are continuing to have disruptions on us. So we had identified initially that we would need some, I think it was $200,000 for next year on top of what we've been approved in this year. It actually worked out more like 400 and some thousand was needed in order to make up the shortfall. We're asking for an additional $500,000 in funds to make up the shortfall. It comes down to supply chain issues and inflation and the rest of the ongoing issues. We're asking for this to be done now rather than waiting for the capital budget to be approved and then bringing it forward next year because of the timeframes of awarding the tender document, because of the timeframes and the quote is valid for X number of days, but also the delivery times for some of the equipment and material that is needed in the construction of the new facility.
Motion, please, Council. Tony?
I move that council approve the award of the penitentiary booster station project to Nitro Construction Limited for the amount of $1,473,702, excluding GST.
Seconder, please. Patrick, comments? Crystal?
Thank you, Your Worship. I know I've asked this question before. There is no other funding from the federal government to provide because this is to help their building at the penitentiary.
So the penitentiary booster station supplies water up to the penitentiary, but also to the Churchill network, the Ag Society, and to Dorva. So those are the facilities. The federal government has, through the correctional services, has indicated they are not willing to put up any cash because their view is that they are already paying for it through their rates in the agreement. Same from Churchill said the same thing. We did make an application under AMWWP, and that was rejected through the grant process. I'm still not 100% certain clear why they did reject it, but end of the day, it was rejected for the grant funding. We have been looking for additional grant opportunities. However, we have not found any.
Tom?
So we hired MPE to research this project and come up with these companies that have bid on it. One of the things that we found with recent construction that we're doing for the seniors was that in the construction company's estimation, many of the subcontractors are inflating their costs simply because they are afraid that the costs for their items and the stuff that they are going to need is going to go up. So they have purposely, added on 25% to what their actual cost would be right now. Would MPE have kind of researched that a little bit and determined that these bids are fairly legitimate and fairly realistic? Or how much research would they do on our behalf into the background of the bids of these companies?
So when we get the bids in, it's not a lump sum. We do get a breakdown of what's being bid. We, as part of the review process, that we expect MP to do, and that when I worked as a consultant in my past was done, was you look at the numbers, and in your recommendation to the owner, you state, this is a legit number. The values are in alignment with other projects going on that we are aware of at this point in time. That is what we've been getting from MP. What we've been hearing on various projects is these are the numbers that are coming in on all projects. Everything is going up. Bridge 11 was a very good example of that. The simple fact is that the supply, we've entered a global market where a lot of stuff, surprisingly, a lot of stuff is made in China. So when China is a disruption, everyone else feels the pain. And add in inflation at several months at its levels, we are seeing this coming right the way through the market. And I would love to say, let's not award it. Let's wait 6 months and everything will be better. It'll be the way it was before. But I would lay money right now that if we wait 6 months, we'll all be crying about what we see on the bids that come in on this. It's an item in the market. We are seeing some stuff happening in the market where we are getting prices where it's just, this is not reasonable. And in those cases, I'm going to Daryl and going, yeah, I'm recommending we don't actually award this. We rescope something out and think it through and try and get a different enough project that we can rebid it out and try for a much more legitimate bid by getting additional bidders on it. But if you look at the recommendation letter from MP and the RFD itself, Nitro is what 1.4. One of the contractors bid $2.4 million. So that means across 5 bidders, there is a $1 million price difference for this item. So I hate to say it, and I kind of sound like a broken record, but we are in an incredibly bad period for trying to do major work. And we've managed to time it at a period where our aged infrastructure is getting to the end of its life on several of these items. So it's, to an extent, we pay it now, or we desperately hope something is going to change radically in the next year or two. And during that period, this current item doesn't break on us.
Tony?
Yeah, I agree, Dave. I think waiting long. I mean, this is the world we're in today. You can't get stuff done for what you used to get stuff done for, as we heard from CIBC tonight, and this is the world we're going to be in for the next year or so. So, waiting will only drive up price. You have 5 bidders. You're not going to get any more. You're not going to get any less dollars bid either. So this is critical infrastructure. I think it's built in the 60s. There's safety issues involved, being that it's below ground. I don't know that we have any choice to delay. It just needs to get done.
Stephanie?
Thanks, Dave, for the presentation and everything. I just have a question about the site occupancy at $1,500 per day. I wasn't too sure what that's about.
So what that's about is a way of making sure the contractor meets their schedule. So we basically say you can be occupying the site and it costs you X number of dollars. So especially if they start going over schedule, it starts costing them money. So it's a way of encouraging them to meet the schedule that they propose and give to us.
Thank you.
All right, all in favor? Carried. Thanks, Dave. Okay, we now need to go into closed session. Can I get a motion, council, please? Tony?
I move that council close the meeting to the public for discussions related land development and third-party contracts as per FOIP 16, disclosure harmful to business interests of a third party, FOIP 23, local public body confidence, and FOIP 24, advice from officials.
Seconder Stephanie, all in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being with us this evening. We will just be done when we're finished here. Just a reminder that please help your neighbors. If you can get out and shovel snow, grab extra extra sidewalk beside you, or seniors, or be a snow angel. There's just a lot of snow out there and we just need to help each other. So thank you, everybody. Have a great week.